Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to In Such a Time. And today, Rabbi, you and I are going to talk about something based upon a recent Netflix series that I watched that really piqued my interest. And when often we watch or read things, we bring it back to ourselves and how this lands on us. And so today we're going to be talking about, I'm sure, your favorite series that you've watched on Netflix.
Absolutely, but I haven't watched.
The four-part Hulk Hogan biographical series. So thank you again for indulging me. And I talked to you about why I think this really pertains to us as rabbis. So
I'm on board.
You're on board?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me just ask before, did you know who Hulk Hogan was? And have you ever watched a wrestling match growing up or now?
I have watched a wrestling match. I'm not sure why and in what context. And I find it interesting because I find most things performative to be interesting. And I find it fascinating, people who take on personas and really embody those personas. So,
right. So this is really where I wanted to bring this from, and I appreciate you, starting the conversation. So for those who haven't watched the series on Netflix, it's a four-part series about really the rise and fall of Hulk Hogan as a character who is played by this person named Terry Bollea from Florida, but inhabits over time this alternate persona, as many wrestlers do, named Hulk Hogan. And really, I thought it's so fascinating towards the second half of this series, in which the question is raised when someone inhabits a character so many times and to such acclaim that at a certain point they are known for the character and not for themselves, then is there a point when the person loses themselves to the character, or the original person ceases to exist? Does Terry Bollea, in a way, cease to exist and give way entirely to this persona of Hulk Hogan? And in the series, it really talks about all of these terrible effects later on the line about his personal life and about mistakes he makes and his marriage, his relationships, his addiction problems, bankruptcy, etc. But a lot of it has to do with his losing of his sense of self. And so when I watched this series, it really made me think about the role of clergy. I think all of us in the world, not just clergy, everyone inhabits somewhat of a persona when they walk out the front door every day.
Sure.
All right, there's our personal lives, and there's the person that we show to the outside world. And perhaps you and I, as rabbis, have this very fortunate perspective. We get to see some of the life behind the closed door in life's most intimate moments.
Yes.
Right? And we know that everyone walks around with their baggage, but smiles as though everything's just great, usually.
Especially in suburbs, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, you think so?
I don't know. We don't need to talk about that now. Okay, keep going.
So it made me think about that, like a professional wrestler who is performing, clergy are often up in a position of leadership and authority, very often up on a bema or a stage in front of many other people. And there is a idea of who the clergy person is and how that clergy person interacts. But that for some clergy, that especially if the persona they inhabit on the bema or on the lectern is different than who they really are, is there that same sense of dissonance? And is there the risk of losing oneself to their role in a performative position? And I mentioned to you that I got this advice from the former senior rabbi at my past congregation, who was, had a lot of wisdom, Rabbi Pierce, Stephen Pierce. And he mentioned to me that as a rabbi coming into the field, I had to be really careful to not let, in his words, the synagogue become the other woman, because clergy will show up at their houses of worship and people will treat what they have to say as though it's interesting and has authority and deserves reverence. And they'll be treated with a certain level of respect, but that they may go home and not be treated with that same level of reverence, right? I'll take this one, I come home and I get handed the dishes, or I forgot to take out the trash, or all the sort of things that I've been neglecting at home, and that our spouses ideally don't, and our families don't treat us as we are like someone of the same authority. And so for some clergy, it can become addictive to just stay at the synagogue all of the time
Yeah.
and every night fill it up with meetings and events and every weekend, and to sort of become Hulk Hogan and lose the Terry Bollea when you are at home. And the last thing that I want to hand this off to you here to say, I think that was especially likely or more alluring in an era when clergy were valued for their authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so there really was this authoritative role that the clergy would play on the bema, whereas nowadays clergy are much more prioritized for their availability, their relatability, their approachability, all of this. And that maybe we have an easier time just being ourselves on the bema and not having an alternative rabbi voice than some of our predecessors, who we often will criticize in retrospect and say, well, that was silly, that era where rabbis sort of put on their voice and acted like they were Moses on Mount Sinai. So I want to bring this to you. I want to ask you, do you have that same sort of relationship in terms of being treated with authority, like at work versus then in your personal life, less so? How do you, unlike Terry Bollea, nay Hulk Hogan, how do you hold on and protect that authentic self?
It's interesting. I think a lot about this topic in my rabbinic persona, because I don't think I have such a rabbinic persona. I grew up, as many of you know, in a household with clergy people. My dad was a rabbi, my mom was a clergy person, and they also didn't have persona so much. They were very much who they were. But I could see the switching. There's the who you are at work, which not at work, in your position, which has a lot of boundaries. That is something that I learned. When you're in a position, you have a lot of boundaries. And then there's the other part of you, the more personal part of you, which also has a certain level of boundaries, but they're different than what you than the role you hold for other people. And sometimes for me, that balance is a little bit blurry, because people call me rabbi. It's actually very different than when it was in Israel. I feel like in some ways people put me on a more of a pedestal here, because in Israel that no one actually has any respect for a female rabbi.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. And so I was always looking to be the rabbi, and I was like, oh, you're not really.
You wanted to be Hulk Hogan. You were always Terry Bollea.
100%. And here, I'm not going to call myself Hulk Hogan.
You're more of an Ultimate Warrior type.
I'm like the Sasha Fierce to the Beyonce.
Got
Okay.
it. Very good. I like that.
Thank you. No, here I think I am who I am all the time. I live in a Jewish community. People know me as Leora. People know me as Rabbi. Here, it's also lines that are blurry, but I'm very aware of how I'm aware when I'm sitting with a person, what position they put me in.
Mm-hmm.
What are they sharing with me because they trust me as their friend, or what are they sharing with me because they trust me as their rabbi? And based on that, I try to show up in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, even though I think what you see is what you get, and you've seen me in all the roles as mom, as Leora, as rabbi, as person who's trying to finish a task, all these things together, it's mostly the same authentic person. But there are moments that I do feel the weight of the role. And I think more than feeling the weight of the role and what it does for me as a persona, I think people sometimes need you to be the rabbi. And they need you to show up and hold that space for them and hold that position for them, whether you want to or not. It makes me think of the Kohanim, of the priests in the Torah, who have to put on their garb, who have to get ready, who have to prepare themselves for this, for being in this role. And it's something that they have to really embody. It's not, every person is a person, but then you have to take on a task. And so I actually find it really interesting when my kids watch me in rabbi role, because there's been moments, and I'm sorry if it's happened to any of you here, that I get a call for an emergency. I have a child crying in the background because they need my attention. I'm trying to do some kind of funeral intake, and I'm having to bifurcate myself, mom, you can't see me when I'm on the phone with you, but I'm like, stop talking. Like I'm trying to have a professional conversation. And the person on the phone, um, hopefully has my full attention. But sometimes sometimes the authentic self is a little bit split. I am very much this person. I'm very much that person. But the role switching can be a lot to hold. And I think that you're right. In an era where I think boundaries, lines are blurred in general, um, going in and out of that role and of the Hulk Hogan Terry dynamic, yeah, it's not like it's not like a 180. It's kind of
Right.
always happening.
Right. I love that you brought this to the Kohanim and the idea of putting on specific garb and purifying oneself first and really having to be very mindful of the role. And I think that again with the Kohanim with putting on the umim and the thummim, like this breastplate with stones representing each of the 12 tribes, that they were sort of wearing the tribes on themselves to remember that what their position was. I think that's so important. When I was thinking about this topic, I went to somewhere else in the Tanakh, which is I really thought about the Terry Bollea Hulk Hogan dynamic. You're laughing already, and
And I'm laughing because it's found in the Torah, of course.
and Hadassah and Esther.
Oh yeah, well, Hadassah and Esther had. I'm sorry, but I interrupted you.
You run away with it, please.
Excited because in the Zohar, in the Kabbalistic readings, Esther is supposed to be representative of the priests, and she is the more modern embodiment of that priest, of taking on a role, of taking on. She's Hadassah, but then she becomes this queen, and or yeah, she's Hadassah. She's the personal version of herself, and then she's to take on this role as the Persian queen. And how does she have to do that? She has to prepare herself. She has to fast. She has to put on these garments. She has to see her people, her constituents. She has to feel the weight of
enter into a holy of holy space. Yeah. Yes. It's interesting. You are coming to us from the Zohar with I think that's a very positive aspirational reading. I was reading it in the other direction to say, does Mordecai going to Esther, is he telling Hulk Hogan to remember that he's actually Terry Bollea? Here is this nice Jewish girl named Hadassah who lives from outside of the walls of the palace, who through winning a beauty pageant eventually takes on this character of one of the wives of Hashverosh, who changes her name to a performer name of Esther, who leaves behind a very Jewish, rooted in the land of Israel name of Hadassah, Myrtle.
Yeah.
Right. And takes on name based on the god Ishtar. Right. So, and even there's this wonderful section in the series on Netflix about the ways in which the WWE used politics and through characters like Mount Fuji, Sergeant Slaughter, the Iron Sheik, played on anti-Iranian, anti-Japanese, anti-Russian sentiment, and Hulk Hogan became this great American hero and would come in with the flag waving in red, white, and blue, and very much used patriotism to stir up the side, but always had a foil in this like the foreign devil who was against it. And here is Esther sort of losing herself to this character that is moving further away from her roots of who she was as Hadassah from the burbs, rather than Esther singing in the city. And Mordecai has to say to her basically, remember, like Esther, like remember who you are, remember where you came from, remember your people, don't lose yourself and don't lose sight of your connection to us. And has to have this sort of aha moment. And I think it's in watching this series, it made me feel like this character, Terry Bollea, never had that moment, never had someone to do that for him, or perhaps wasn't able to hear that call and ultimately loses himself to this character.
It happens to rabbis. I mean, as you identified, and I think it happened more like rabbis. It was everything to them. It was their persona. It was the reason for existing in the world. It was authority and identity and connection and really just everything. And it's so interesting for me watching sometimes rabbis who have to step down from their role at the end of their career. And how do they struggle because how do you go from being the central figure in people's lives to being on the side? And so I feel very lucky to, I mean, I do feel like a rabbi, and I feel very lucky to feel that and to love doing it, but it's not my everything. It's not like I don't wake up in the morning, I'm like, I'm a rabbi today. Like, I'm gonna go for it. I wake up and I'm like, I care about the Jewish people, and I feel very lucky to have a role in that. And I often struggle so much with the fact that people take my words seriously. A rabbi who I really admire, she was telling me what she was working on for high holidays one year, and I said to her, "Do you think anyone like actually listens to you?" And and she goes, "If you think that people actually don't listen to you, like you should be in therapy."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, I am, and I'm not sure." And
you should have said, if you think people do listen to you, you should be in therapy.
I should have said that. But no, but it always makes me uncomfortable that people take me seriously, even though I take myself very seriously. But I guess I'm very Jewish in the sense I'm a little anti-establishment, and I don't put people on pedestal just because they're in a role. So when people put me or put you in that place, I have to adjust myself and understand how I feel about it.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here. I think that any of us who inhabit leadership roles naturally suffer from what we would call imposters, the theory that we are all worried all the time that someone's going to find out that we actually don't know it all, or that we're all just making it up as we go along. And this imposter syndrome, happens to people throughout various industries. And the same thing when, this idea of retirement and no longer having the same authority, and who am I after I've no longer taken so seriously. I think that those are very common. I think that you're absolutely spot on that we as clergy people, that this, I think it's all the more so because we aren't only in positions of authority, we are up in front of large groups of people, especially at high holidays and such, but B, we have that moment of authority in times of deep intimacy and vulnerability. I think that when you're a senior partner at a law firm, you may not have those same intimate moments with the people with you connect that you do as a clergy person. And the fact that someone is trusting us to hold them in our hands, that is an incredible responsibility, but also a deep source of imposter syndrome. I've had times, admittedly, where I have come home from work and my family members want to talk to me about something, and I'm not there to listen. I don't have the energy or space to listen to them, and I'm kind of tapped out from being a really deep listener and focusing, which is hard for me when I'm here at the synagogue. And I have gotten the comment from members of my family to say, why can't you listen to me?
You listen to everybody all day long.
Right. Why is it that you listen to Joe Schmo congregant, but you won't have the same focus for me? Shouldn't I come first instead? And that's a really tough thing to deal with. And that is part of that Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea dynamic that maybe I'm putting more effort in here and I feel like I can ease off and I can rest more at home, but that's not fair to my family members. It's really, really hard dynamic. And so I deal with that. One last thing that I want to mention. I think a really instructive life lesson for me was at my last synagogue in San Francisco. There was a beloved rabbi who was a mentor for me in incredible ways, who after 18 years at the synagogue was unceremoniously shown the way out of the synagogue.
Yeah.
In a way that was not particularly well done. And I remember this beloved rabbi that it took 2 years. And after 2 years, no one talked about him anymore. And it made me, I think it's a very healthy thing, realize that our job is to do our part and to leave things in the best possible way so the community keeps on succeeding, that's the ultimate mark of our success, but that we should not expect to be sort of deified later on and will be forgotten. And that's good. That's healthy.
That's the tradition. We don't want to. People are not at the center. I mean, the reason that Rabbi,
it's not about us.
It's not about us in our specific reform world, because
no, you're right. The Hasidic world is a different animal.
Yeah, because in the Hasidic world, if you're a Talmid Chacham, if you're a Dayan, if you're like a wise student or you are a decider of Jewish halakha, then you do have a great amount of power and you are put on a pedestal and you do hold on to that role and you do see yourself above others. And also with the Kohanim, also with the priests, when power comes responsibility, comes corruption, comes all sorts of things. And so I think it's very different because we are not the holders of Jewish law. That is not why people come to us.
Right.
We are not the holders of moral authority, even though I think some people put us into that roles. We are, I mean, I see my role as a pastor, as someone who's identifying certain issues in society that we can talk about together. But in my head, I don't place myself above others. And which is interesting because I think sometimes people do want the rabbi to hold themselves in a higher regard, to hold themselves in a higher moral standard, to hold themselves in a higher, not higher, to have an opinion about the ins and outs of society. Mm-hmm. People want a lot from the rabbi, and I'm still pretty early career rabbi. I'm learning what people want. I'm learning what my role is. I'm learning what my strengths are in portraying that. And I'm also learning to, just have 2 feet on the ground. And I remember when I came for my interview here, and I was nervous, obviously.
Yes, we're very intimidating.
You're very intimidating. And I remember I went into the office, it's now my office, just to take a deep breath because I was like going. And I took off my shoes. And I remember that you came in to say something and you were barefoot. And
why are you gonna reveal this now? No. We're all Kohanim is what you're saying.
Exactly. And I was like, yes, I like this. because I don't want to be in a place where someone takes themselves too seriously. It's important for me that we're going to be doing a lot of very serious work, but that at the end of the day, we are who we are and we're authentic in who we are. We're not performing for each other. We're not playing a role, even though, of course, there's some performance, there's some role play in all this, but at least for one another behind the scenes, and because those dynamics also exist in synagogues, that we're humans.
Yeah.
And that was meaningful for me.
Oh, great. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something that you said a little bit earlier. Like you, I come to the rabbinate so much with an emphasis on trying to be relatable and being informal. And a lot of my idea of what I want to do as a rabbi has to do with deconstructing a lot of what I sensed growing up within the Jewish world and at the synagogue. And so for me, it's pretty easy to be myself on the bema because that is my authentic sense of what I want to be as a rabbi. You and I we've mentioned this. We talk to B'nai Mitzvah students before we go on the bema with them, and we say to them all the time, I'm going to be no different on the bema than I am right now, so you don't have to be different either. We're just going to be ourselves up there and do our thing. I have an issue with the high holidays. The high holidays, our congregants, I think some of them expect a greater level of formality and reverence than I naturally come to even myself. And there have been times, I remember, I'll give an example, at my first year being a rabbi in San Francisco, I gave a sermon in which I brought up a chalkboard and started writing and sort of like doing a live teaching in the middle of Shabbat services. And we had a older German Reform rabbi, retired like in his 90s, who had translated Ibn Ezra from the Hebrew into the German. He would come to our services and he wrote a letter to the senior rabbi saying that I should be fired. And the senior rabbi sat with me and gave me this letter, and I eventually took the rabbi out for lunch and took the feedback. But for me, it came off as being irreverent of Shabbat by basically turning a sermon into a informal teaching session. And on the high holidays, where my internal compass wants to lower the formality as much as possible. At my last synagogue, I used to run a Yom Kippur retreat at the local camp in, reading Torah in flip-flops and going on a hike and going and having yoga sessions and doing art projects and such, and everyone in jeans. Yes, and that was my happiest moments of high holidays. And it's almost as though I have to the reverse of what our earlier ancestors as rabbis did maybe a generation or two ago. I have to, in my mind, remember that this is more of a sacred opportunity, and I need to match the congregant's expectations of formality that I don't naturally come to on my own.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was in a discussion with some congregants and who were saying that Shabbat services of coming together and hearing a sermon,
Mhm.
going through the prayers, that's so meaningful for them in
Mhm.
the way that we do that.
Mhm.
And I was thinking to myself, sometimes I just want to like blow it all up and do something totally different and like, engage in a different way, and which we do, which is great.
Mhm.
But like people people are comforted by certain roles, they're comforted by certain formats, they're comforted by certain givens. And so the rabbi playing a certain role, the synagogue showing up in a certain way, that's comforting for people. And so I think that sometimes you and I, or all rabbis, or all clergy, we deal with what are the things that kind of propel us and drive us and get us excited about Judaism and about being creative and thinking on our toes. And also, what does the community need? And those two things often align. And when they do align, that's actually really sacred. And sometimes they don't align. And then what do you do there? Um, I mean, I've shared with you, I sometimes think that our worship is like too structured and too orchestrated, and my authentic Jewish voice, not necessarily my rabbinic voice, would just say, let's just like bring it down, bare bones, maybe not even a guitar, maybe just go, maybe not rehearse it, maybe not have it. And then the rabbinic voice in me, it's like, no, but people need a certain thing. And I'm here to serve them. I'm here not as a conduit for a spiritual experience, but I'm here as a guide for this experience. And this is where they're at, and this is the language that they expect and need. And so it's always a push and pull between the Beyonce and the Sasha. No, I'm just kidding. It's always a give and pull between what do I want as my own human being, and what does the rabbi need to do for the community.
I appreciate that. And I think for me, two of the areas where I needed to learn to get comfortable with the authoritative voice, with being the Hulk Hogan versus the Cherry Bollea, was I find that weddings and funerals
Yes,
as
agreed.
liminal moments in which you are holding people in your hands, and they want structure.
Sure.
They don't want necessarily even approachability. At the wedding, the couple is standing up there, and they're nervous and they're joyous, and they want you to do things right and
Of
to
course.
add the structure to this life. And certainly in funerals in which you are adding structure to chaos, people expect to look to you for authority, and in a way that at first for me, when I began my rabbinic career, was very uncomfortable. I
Yeah.
had to learn how to assert myself in weddings and to be more frontal in a way that I am comfortable, because that's what the people needed. I find that those are the two times in which I am the most sort of
Agreed.
out of myself.
I agree with that. I definitely feel that I'm in a role in both of those places, and I'm very comfortable being in those roles because I know that somebody needs to be in charge here, and somebody is holding the tradition, not holding the tradition. Someone is the holder is the holder of the Jewish wisdom that I'm bestowing. And I did a funeral last week where, and I have a certain rhythm to things, like when you're in a role, you have a certain rhythm to things. And I'd never worked with this funeral director before, and they didn't do it the way I wanted to do it. And I found myself like really leaning into that role for a second. And I went up to them and I said, in order for this to be really successful and good, I need this, and that. And I would really like if you could help me make that happen, because this is going to be better for everybody. And I think that that's something that I needed to learn how to do. You have to find your own rabbinic voice, you have to find your own confidence in that. You have to believe in the role that people are putting you in.
Plus, it's easier, I would think, to do as a female rabbi here than in Israel. If you said that to someone at the cemetery or such, if you were allowed to do the funeral, even that would be very, very tough.
I remember doing that in Israel, and I remember that's so interesting. I'm now putting those two experiences one next to the other. I remember being so apologetic about everything that I asked for there, and here I was like, "There's no apology. This is what we're doing. It needs to be this way, and that's it."
Yeah. I want to add one other facet to this if I can. We have slightly different structures in that you live in White Plains and I live right here in Chappaqua.
Right.
So I have the dynamic that I don't often go out to dinner with my family in Chappaqua restaurants. And that's because there's a good chance that I'm going to see members of the congregation. And that sounds terrible to say. It's not as though I don't like seeing members of our congregation. I really do. But when I'm with my family, and then people are stopping up to say hello or such, that it for them can it's worlds colliding, and they want to be able. My family, I think, wants to protect their private world in a way it's hard to do. And so, as a consequence, when my family spends time together, we tend to do so, you know, outside of a 5 mile radius of our home.
Yeah.
Even when when I'm by myself, like for a long time, I was doing a lot of meetings at Bobo's Cafe. And
Yeah.
Bobo's is great because at Bobo's, you can run into half the congregation on a given day. It's hard to talk about things privately there.
Absolutely.
And so I was looking for other places as well. But I kind of like the idea of seeing the congregation. But I want to ask for you living in White Plains, if you hang out near your home, I'm assuming you don't often run into congregants the same way you would if you were here in Chapel, Pleasantville, Briarcliff area. And can I add one more to this? I've mentioned this with several congregants. We live in the Mount Pleasant part of Chappaqua, which means that I can go to the Mount Pleasant Town Pool.
Stunning.
And the Mount Pleasant Town Pool is not a very Jewish gang over there. It's largely Thornwood Valhalla, a lot of tattoos, a lot of crosses all over. If I were to be a member at one of the local pool clubs here, and if I had taken my kids when they were younger, for them, they would lose a little bit Terry Bollea to Hulk Hogan because everyone would come up and of course it's the rabbi, and that's great. I would be so appreciative of that. But we also have to be really protective of our home life and our relationship with our kids, especially. How do you do that? And is that a factor for you? Do you find living a little bit further away to be a buffer when it comes to that?
It's a little different because I also live in a Jewish community and people know me as a rabbi.
But not as their rabbi.
Not as their rabbi.
Yeah.
So it's different. But I definitely feel an eye on me sometimes for what I do, maybe how I dress. She's taking her phone out on Shabbat, like what's happening. But my kids, and I'm thinking as a rabbi's kid growing up, my kids don't have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely not the rabbi's kid unless they're coming to synagogue. I think for me, there was like an element of learning how to not perform, but to, you act a certain way in front of congregants. If you're having a temper tantrum, as a child, if you're having a temper tantrum, like continue, but like don't have the worst temper tantrum of your life in front of the congregants. And I remember I've said to my kids a few times, guys, like, we're coming to synagogue or we're going to be in a place where there's community members. Like, I really need you to pull it together. And what's special about my kids is they said, sure. And then they didn't. And which is all kids, and lost it. And I that used to make me irate. Like, we need to present us a certain way. We need to, we're being held to a certain standard. We're models in a certain way of what a Jewish family should be and can be. And I gave that up. I said, we're just going to be people, and we're just going to model being humans. And people are going to see me as a flawed human being because I am.
Right.
And they're going to see me as someone who's balancing a lot of things in my life, as being a rabbi and being a mom and being my own person. And so I'm happy that my kids don't feel like the sense of having to perform in the way that I did as a kid. I don't think my parents ever tried to instill that in me, but I felt that. Like, I felt all eyes on me.
Yeah.
And I think that having a little bit of distance definitely allows for them not to feel like they are under the microscope. I do see other rabbi families who live in my neighborhood who are rabbis in the neighborhood as well, that their kids have a different relationship with that than mine. And so I'm so happy when my kids are here and do feel a connection to this community, but I am happy that they have their own life and their own ability to just grow without people looking at them in a judgmental way. Not to say that the people are judging the rabbi's kids, but people are sometimes judging the rabbi's kids.
Yeah, I think it's really hard when it comes to kids. It's can be tough. I'd say on my kids, it makes not tough, an awkward situation in which when I am at a high school play event, when I'm
Yeah.
dropping up, picking up, there are kids that are not friendly with my kids who will come up and talk to me.
Yeah.
And watching this series and watch the way that Terry Bollea's kids become increasingly, especially his daughter, who does not speak to him and didn't go to his funeral, that lost him to the Hulk Hogan. That can be really tough. And both, my kids post B'nai Mitzvah, um, my older daughter went to Bet Torah to the local
Yeah.
conservative synagogue for the teen program because it's a lot easier than going where your dad's the rabbi.
I did that too as a
And
teen.
my younger one did Alexander Moss High School in Israel and is now doing J-teen and giving that space. And I think on one hand, one could be insulted to say, why wouldn't you want to come? This is our synagogue. Don't you want to be with me? I feel as though it's really healthy to give them their own world and separate space. And I would not want to grow up in a synagogue environment in which, my dad was the rabbi that way and so present in the lives of people around me, even people who are not my friends. That's tough.
It's so tough. It's so tough. It's interesting. I ran into someone in Chappaqua who I grew up with, who knew me as the rabbi's kid, because the Jewish world is very small, and I always felt very much in that role as the rabbi's kid. It's interesting. Maybe I feel less of the role of the rabbi as I did the rabbi's kid sometimes. That's something to work out, and having them give their perspective on how they related to me as a kid, like we really liked you, but you were the rabbi's kid, and we didn't know how to relate to you, and it's hard to play roles.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to play roles for other people, and so I think that what I'm so fortunate for at this moment is that I think that the world has so much performance, um, social media, and all the ways that we do, that people are really looking for authenticity, and they're really craving authenticity, and they're craving honesty. And so when I don't have to perform, when I get to just show up and be myself, and there's certainly a performative element to that, in many ways, it's like it's a tikkun, it's a repair for like what I felt like I had to do as a kid, what I'm so happy my kids don't have to do,
Yeah.
and what I think Judaism is supposed to be, and what the rabbinate is supposed to be. It's about being yourself and getting people excited about Judaism in the ways that excite you.
It reminds me on social media. I remember that this first started, when social media started really getting going, and started first with Facebook, I remember watching colleagues who would create two different Facebook pages, one for them and one for their rabbi persona. And it was truly Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan,
Yeah,
right? Of what part of yourself do you want to share with your congregants? What part do you want to share with the world? And it was such a dichotomy and a stark example of this role playing
totally.
that clergy do. Um, it just reminds me of that a lot. So I know we should really wrap up soon. I wanted to end with, I think for all of us, we have different passions, activities that we pursue that ground us, that remind us that we are Terry Bollea and not Hulk Hogan. I'm wondering if you would share, what are the things that make you feel authentically you, or maybe remind you that as much as you we have this authentic role as rabbis, there's something different and separate to ourselves as well. Are there things that you do to be grounded, to remind yourself of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I try to meet people in my life who don't have so much respect for my role as rabbi, who knew me before I ever decided to go into the rabbinate, who will shut me down very, very rapidly when my ego is getting a little inflated. So that's a big one. Um, I do a lot of work on my soul and on my mind. Um, whether it's through writing or through therapy or through just discussion with other people. And I think that one of the things that I'm proud of in my rabbinate is that I think grounds me to Leora and not Rabbi and Londy, is that the writing that I do, even in a rabbinic voice, is always about human things. It's always about the things that are not perfect. And so that is something that I'm always trying to bring up and to make clear, that there's no one, it doesn't matter how much you're smiling. It doesn't matter how much you are presenting as one thing. We're all human. And so I think that that's a lot of what I do
Yeah.
in order to just stay grounded in me as Leora.
That's
How about
great.
you?
I think a lot of us, the stories that we tell about ourselves are so much ingrained in our adolescence and when we first sort of create our persona of who we are. And so for me, we talk a lot about that, especially in the warmer months. I go surfing all of the time, and that's a big thing of a reminder. It makes me feel like a kid again
Yeah.
and reminds me of growing up and sort of that joy. I spend a lot of time biking. I spend a lot of time just going on walks and outdoors, and all of that
Yeah.
for me is really just very, very grounding. I am lucky to live in with a family that treats me with little or no authority. And so I think often get pecked down to size. I may have shared with you the story before. It's a great one. When I was first in my first year of rabbinical school, I came home. I was studying a sugi of Talmud, and I came home to my girlfriend, my Israeli girlfriend, now wife. And I turned to you, I'm like, this is this amazing sugya that I just learned, and I thought it was so great, and I want to share it with you. And she took a look at it and she said, "Oh, I remember that from eighth grade," which was, it lowered me like, so down. I'm like, do not get on your high horse. And you're just who you are. I want to end with one last piece of text. There's this famous section from in the Torah where Moses is on top of Mount Sinai and the people are building the golden calf, and God says to Moses, Lech red, like go down to your people. And there's this great commentary, not just go down, but like, Moses, what are you doing up here?
Yeah.
Why are you up here? Your people are down there. Go, like, who made you so high and mighty? Get down from your high horse and just go be yourself again. I think that's God's Terry Bollea moment to Moses the Hulk Hogan, and I try to do that a lot.
As you were speaking about your family's sense of reference towards you, I was thinking about my 4-year-old, so clever, my 4.5-year-old. And I went outside to take a call for the synagogue, and he wanted my attention. He was screaming, Ima, Ima, Leora, Londy, all these things. And then he opens the window and he goes, Rabbi Londy. And the whole neighborhood heard. And I said, what do you want? And it was just such a raw, uncut moment. And it brought me way down from wherever I was.
It's funny, by calling you your Hulk Hogan name is how he reminded you that you actually were Terry Bollea.
It was like just rubbing in my face. No one here cares that you are Rabbi Londy.
Well, for those listening, if you want to watch a really interesting character study of someone who becomes so performative to the point that they seem to lose themselves, even if you're not into wrestling, I thought that series was really, really interesting. And I'm so glad to have you as a partner that when I watch this, I can, like I say, think in my head, I can't wait to share this with Rabbi Londy. We got to talk about this. So thank you very much for participating with me.
And now I got to go watch. Now I actually have to watch the thing that we spent and now we're talking about.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. Until next week.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.